Welcome back to the Start and Scale podcast. I'm your host, Jab Brandwood, and this is a place where we're speaking with people who are starting and scaling tech businesses. We're talking with founders, investors, and everyone in between. This week, I sit down with Holly Donohue, Fractional Chief Product Officer at Product Rebel. With recent experience running product teams at Co-op and Purple Wi-Fi, she's now helping startup businesses with everything product. In this episode, we discuss loads of things, from the number one thing businesses get wrong when it comes to product, traction versus validation, and the importance of customer feedback.
And actually what I found for the very early stage businesses, sometimes there's a real question over, have they got a product problem or have they got a marketing problem in terms of why they're not gaining traction?
I hope you enjoy the episode. Holly, thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
You found us in the end. You did the common mistake that everyone does, goes to the wrong building, which, yeah.
Well, they both have the same name, so it's quite difficult.
Both have the same name, but that one's nicer, which is really tough, because then you go there and you come here and you're like, oh, this is okay.
This is pretty nice.
It's like when you test drive a car and then you get into your old car and you're like, oh, this is rubbish. But anyway, so look, for anyone who doesn't know who Holly Donohue is, who is Holly Donohue?
So I am a fractional chief product officer and product coach. So I work with different businesses, usually at the startup to scale up end of the market, and I work as a part-time product leader for them. So for organisations which maybe don't need a full-time product leader yet, can't afford a full-time product leader yet, but would really benefit from that knowledge and expertise in the organisation, I work with them, which means that I work with multiple businesses at the same time. So although I might work with one business for 2 days a week, then I'll work with another business for another 2 days a week. And then I also coach product leaders as well. Wow.
So it must be quite interesting speaking to all these different businesses who are at the beginning of their journey. We don't know what product is or the term product. You weren't always Holly Donohue fractional CPO, right? No. So, as you know, our vision at Tact, I don't know if you do know, our vision at Tact is to create a world where everyone gets their dream job, right? Super cheesy, but we love it. Could you draw for me what you wanted to be when you grew up? Okay,
I will give it a go. Now it's definitely not the time to reveal that I did actually do an art degree back in the day.
Oh my God, pressure.
I know. No, but this is not going to be good.
Fair enough. Usually the people who have some sort of skill in drawing tend to do the worst ones, because they kind of just like, I haven't got time, let's not do it.
Oh, it's terrible already.
I always try and guess as I go, but yeah, you haven't given me much here.
Oh dear.
So you did an arts degree?
Yeah, I did a degree in ceramics. So I always say that our field trip was to a toilet factory, which I'm not even kidding. I actually focus more on the art side of things, but I decided to go eventually into tech, which interestingly I think I use a lot of the problem-solving skills that I developed and the kind of creative thinking skills. So I don't think it's completely irrelevant. I think that building software is actually a really creative industry. We just don't always think about it like that. Okay. This is terrible, but
I think you've done a really good job there. I do get what it is, I think. It's very Breaking Bad-esque.
Yeah, I probably should have drawn the table first. It would have helped.
Wow.
There we go. That'll...
Yeah, is that Bunsen burner, I assume?
Yeah. I'm impressed you got that, to be fair.
Yeah. Is it a scientist, right?
Yeah.
Is that dream dead?
I think it's fair to say, but you know, never say never. You never know what might happen.
Exactly. So what was the change in direction for everyone who's watching and not listening? I'm showing the picture. That's probably one of our best, if I'm being honest.
Oh, thank you. Just don't look at the hair.
So what happened? Why did you decide not to do that?
So when I was doing my GCSEs and A-levels, I was either going to go down an art route or a science route. Right. And at the time I ended up going down the art route. I it was the right thing for me at the time. You know, you make these decisions based on where you are in your life at that point in time. I did my degree in ceramics. I then actually, it's quite difficult to find a job in art, so I kind of thought about being an art teacher for a while, so trained to be an art teacher. I realised that I didn't really enjoy doing that. I've got huge respect for anybody who is a teacher because it is a very, very difficult job. But I found that the things that I wanted from teaching, which was that connection with pupils and being able to see them develop, especially when you're not in a core subject, you end up kind of shuttling students in and out of the class, and you don't really get the time to build up a relationship with them, or I found you didn't. So that was when I decided, and that's when I ended up moving into technology, and I've been in tech ever since.
Wow. What was it like getting into technology from a non-technical background?
You know, it's really, the interview I had it was actually for Relion, so I was doing sales support for Relion for the technology part of Relion.
Oh, right.
It was my very, very first job. That's one of the hardest interviews I've ever had. I had a HR interview, and they were really, really pushing me on, why do you want to go into this work?
Like you're a spy.
And maybe this was for, you know, minimum wage back in the day job.
Nice.
So that was, but once even though that wasn't a tech firm, obviously it was a recruitment firm, I spent a year there, but that gave me the vocabulary of tech and helped me understand some of the roles that are in the tech industry, which then enabled me then to get a job in a tech company. Well, I went travelling for a year first, but then I went and got a job in a tech company, and I started off very much on the kind of operations side, doing project management, and then eventually I moved into product management, which is where I've been ever since.
What do people mean by the term product?
Yeah, it's a very good question, actually, because I think it's a term that's used very, very broadly to describe a very large, ambiguous number of things. But in terms of products, I mean, there are many things that are products. Obviously, a glass is a product. So you get the typical physical products. In the world of software, you know, it's easiest to start to think about software applications. So it might be a SaaS product that you've got. It might be an app on your mobile phone, that's a product. But then it also starts to get a little bit more woolly and intangible. So often you'll have a website, which is a product, especially if you are a B2C company, and you might be either generating leads through your website, or you might be actually having transactions happening on your website, especially if you're e-commerce, then that is a product in effect. And then it can either go as far as a service being a product. So if you have a service that is repeatable, that is something that you're doing again and again. So as a fractional CPO, I might have an assessment that I can use and for different clients, and effectively I've productized that service. So essentially it's something that fulfills a user need or a problem. It's a solution to it. That's how I like to think of it. It's a solution to a user or a customer need or problem that is repeatable. I think as soon as you start to, if you think about it from a service, if you're doing a different tailored service for every single client, then that's not really a productized service. And actually, if you start to think about it in the same way of a digital product, if you're writing custom code and tailoring your product beyond recognition for every single customer, arguably that might not actually be a product anymore, because actually you're providing a custom service of code to people, and you're building a custom application almost for each customer. So actually you can start to push digital products out of being true products if you're customizing them too much.
Wow, that's an interesting theory. I never even thought that would be the case. So these businesses who are like, we've got this product that we're going to white label for our customers, they can actually take it too far. So that's like almost expectations they need to set with their customer, being like, there's certain things that you can change, but not everything.
Yeah, I think it gets to the less customizable your product is, the easier it will be to scale. And when you start to get into the world of customer, I mean, I've seen some companies who they really are building very, very customized code over hundreds of days for each customer, and they might only have a small amount of customers, but arguably you're really getting into the territory where there might be a core code base that maybe is the product, but if you're building a lot of customized pieces on top of that, then those customized pieces arguably aren't really a product anymore, because that's not something you can easily take and give to another client.
So for a company who is a service-based company, if they were, because I feel like a lot of people are on a mission to productize what they do for that exact reason, for scale and efficiency and whatever. What would be your best piece of advice for a service-based business who is trying to productize what they're doing?
Yeah, think about which pieces are truly repeatable, which can easily, you can cut that bit out, right?
Yeah, don't worry.
Can easily be translated into something that you can repeat again and again. And start off with keeping it simple as well. Don't feel like you need to launch into, and I'm sure we'll get to this often, I see people almost overcomplicating it. We need this to be a product, so we're going to build lots of code to make it into a product. But actually, a lot of the time you can do pieces quite simply. So, for example, if you were doing an assessment, that's quite a good example, then rather than starting to hire developers to code that, think about using some software that's already there, like Typeform or Google Forms or SurveyMonkey. There's lots of companies out there that provide that you can actually start to just use something that exists already to start to have that repeatable process. Yeah,
because what I've kind of gathered from these conversations that I have quite often is that the first step in anything is to validate your idea. Do people want to buy it, right? Which sounds so obvious, of course. Whereas a lot of founders are in a rush to go and build something themselves, where there is these fantastic low code or no code platforms that you can use, up to a point. But yeah, okay. So the first step is just try and validate your idea and don't build it right away. Use something that already exists.
I think what often happens is people get very wedded to a solution, so they think of the solution first, and as humans we very much think in solutions, and this is what product management often does, and what we are trained to do is to think about the need or the problem that we're solving, because actually there might be multiple ways to solve that need or problem. So if you have an example of, I'm going to use the assessment example again because that's what we're on now. So if you have an example of an assessment, actually one solution might be you manually write that assessment. Another solution might be you use something like a pre-existing software like TypeScript, Google Forms to deliver that assessment. Another solution might be you actually build that assessment. But if you get very wedded to the particular solution, it means that you can't pivot it anymore, and there might be a completely different way of solving that user need that you've not thought of and might be actually cheaper or more cost effective to do. So I think that's the first step, is thinking about if you've come up with a solution and you've decided we're going to build X, really think about, well, what need is that going to actually solve for a user? And is that need important enough that that's going to motivate them to want to switch from however they're solving that need now, or actually use your product? Because change is one of the hardest things to get humans to do, changing their behaviour. And if you're asking somebody to use your product, you're asking them to change their behaviour. And they might be solving that need in a different way already. So they might be already, for example, using a spreadsheet to do a task versus using your product. So in order to make that change, there needs to be a really compelling reason why somebody is going to want to use that product. And either this product makes it so much easier for you that it's worth the pain and the risk of you switching, having to learn how to do something new, potentially having to do effort to migrate whatever information you've already got over to this new solution, or this solution's significantly painful enough that you're already motivated to move on to a new solution. So the really key thing is thinking about that underlying need. And I think that's one of the things that often founders don't think about. They'll just get very, very engrossed and wedded to a solution before they've really thought about what's actually going on for that user, and they make a lot of assumptions about how important that is.
Because I think a really good question a lot of the time is when you're looking at an issue is what would this look like if it were easy? I think it's a really, really powerful way to just get rid of all the bullshit and just kind of like, right, this is how, if it was easy, this is how it would in its simplest form look. And then you can add loads of stuff on top of that, right, if you need to. Why is it you think founders do overcomplicate things?
Yeah, I really love that way of thinking, actually. What would this look like if it's easy? I'm going to use that. Yeah, there we go. I think it's very easy to get very kind of tunnel visioned into a solution. And often what will happen is when you're then having conversations with, most founders will at some point hopefully have conversations with their potential market, their target users, then they might not be asking the right questions because they're already asking questions from a place of they've got this idea in their head in terms of what the solution looks like, rather than asking questions about how this makes the user's life better or the customer's life better. So you can end up just reaffirming what you believe rather than actually truly getting under the surface and testing whether something's the right thing or not. And then I think you have a lot of potentially, people, market advisors, investors, everybody has an opinion on something. And if you're not careful, you end up taking bits of all these other opinions, which are based on experience, but not necessarily based on evidence, which then can end up overcomplicating what you've got.
Wow, yeah, it's really interesting to see that and you're on the ground, you're speaking to these people every single day, so you're seeing this more than most, and we'll dive more into that. Before we get too far into it, I'd love to understand how you got to where you are now, because the fractional world's being self-employed is quite new to you, right? And first question is, how did you get to where you are now?
Yeah, so I've worked in product leadership for 10 years, and I've really enjoyed doing that. And what I realised is what I really particularly enjoy is when I've been working with a new business and understanding the different patterns and things that you see and problems that you see come up again and again and how to solve those, and also helping implementing and introducing change. And when you work with one organisation, there's often a period where you can introduce change, but then it'll settle down and go into BAU. So I wanted to work where I could do more of the pieces that I really enjoyed. And really, I find definitely I found this true, it's the learning experience of being able to work with lots of different businesses, see their ways of working and their ideas, and understand those different patterns of how things work well, how things maybe don't work well. And then it's the challenge of, how do I help this business who are maybe in this position, how do I help them to succeed and improve from where they are? So I really enjoy that challenge. Plus you get to meet a lot of really interesting, inspiring people every day, which I absolutely love doing as well.
Yeah, it must be quite interesting, the fact that you're kind of going, and you put a post out about being a solopreneur, and I know you said you hated that term, but it really accurately describes what you're doing right now. And it must be quite interesting, you're going on this journey, but you're also helping people while they're on this journey too, right?
Yes, definitely. That's definitely been an experience in terms of, and sometimes it's a bit of do as I say and not as I do, because there's definitely been pieces where I'm saying you need to focus more and I need to focus more, and I know I need to do that as well, but it's far easier to give that advice to somebody else than to do it yourself sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think it's definitely been true with marketing, for example. So I've leaned into marketing a little bit, but obviously setting up my own business, that's something I've had to learn a lot more about. And actually what I found for the very early stage businesses, sometimes there's a real question over, have they got a product problem or have they got a marketing problem in terms of why they're not gaining traction? And that's not necessarily clear. And often it's providing some assistance to founders in terms of, you're not ready to have a marketing person yet, or you've not got the funds to have a marketing person yet. So in the meantime, here are some non-scalable ways that you can start to get some initial traction and test your ideas further. So the two do kind of go hand in hand, because in order to be able to validate and test your ideas, you need to find a way to get that idea in front of people. And there's usually, I often find there's going to be a blocker in the founder's mind often in that process somewhere. So sometimes that's actually just putting themselves out there in the first place, whether that's on LinkedIn or public speaking engagements or going into events, however that lead generation model is going to work for them. Most often it's they've might have established quite a good following on LinkedIn, or they've got a really good email list of people that they can speak to, but then it's the next step of actually reaching out and contacting people. And often there's I think when you're building something, you want it to be perfect. You don't want to let people down. And there's almost a little bit of a friction and tension in there, because your MVP should never be perfect. If your MVP is perfect, you have released way too late. So I think it's very hard to release something that you know to be not just imperfect, but really probably a long way from where you want it to be. But also it's really vital to get that early feedback and get those clients on there as much as you can, because obviously it starts to give you revenue coming in, starts to give you traction, makes you more attractive to investors. And also it means that you've got an opportunity to get feedback and shape your product in a way that's really going to deliver results for your users.
That's a really interesting word, traction. And traction and validation, they seem to be the two main things when at this stage. Have you got any examples of how you've helped businesses, or any advice or examples of how someone can validate their idea in a creative way? I think whenever we think about validating ideas, I guess the most obvious way and the most common way is to speak to users, and that definitely gives you a good quality of feedback, especially if you're shaping your questions in a way that's not leading. So if you're saying, will you buy my solution? You're probably not going to get a very strong level of evidence from asking that question, because people will say, yes, I'll buy your software. Doesn't mean they're going to buy your software. But if you start to use things like assumption testing, where you're actually thinking about, well, I'm going to ask people to upload a load of information to this AI tool or to this, other tool. Are people actually going to spend the time and effort doing that? Then you can actually start to run a test to without building the AI tool, to actually figure out, well, I'm asking people to provide a lot of information. A, that's going to take them a lot of time to do and effort to do. And B, are they going to trust that their information data is going to be safe with me as a company? Are they going to be willing to part with that? So I can now design a test where I'm going to ask people to upload information to me, and in return I'm manually going to perform the task that my product is going to perform. So I've seen that done with a chatbot assistance tool, where it's helping people to perform certain tasks, and so they're asking people to interact with the tool, and in the background they're actually performing the tasks that the AI bot will do. But that gives them the feedback to know that A, people are willing to engage with that type of tool, and B, that means that they actually start to get the feedback of, well, what are people going to actually ask it to do? And I've seen another one done in terms of wardrobe, where it's validating, are people going to upload clothes to be styled? And are they going to spend the time taking photos so that they can actually then get style advice? And again, ultimately that tool might be, the products that you build might do that automatically, but in the short term you can do that manually to validate that this is something that people are going to do. So you can test things very, very cheaply, and at the same time you're starting to build up a potential list of users and a potential list of customers for the future as well. So it can be really helpful in terms of helping you get some of that early traction as well, because you can go back to those people when you've actually built the product and say, here it is. Yeah, that email list, I mean, that's really good insight. I think it must be heartbreaking though if you do test it and it doesn't work. I always think that. I've spoken to so many entrepreneurs and they say, I've exited 3 businesses or whatever, and then they'll go on to say, but I founded 7, but 4 of them just died. And I think, oh my God, I'd be just so heartbroken. Have you seen that happen? So I've not been doing it long enough to see a business actually fold yet, but I think the challenge comes when, and this is where it's important not to get too wedded to the solution. If that evidence is telling you that people aren't going to do that, better to know now before you've invested hundreds of thousands of pounds building something than know it too late. But that gives you the opportunity to pivot. So if you know that need still exists, or if there's a problem still there, what's another solution that might work instead? So it gives you the opportunity to pivot your idea. Whereas if you've got very, very wedded to the solution, then you're going to really struggle to change what you're doing. And the mistake I sometimes see
to be honest, it's not just early stage founders. This happens with very established businesses as well, is where you start to disbelieve what that evidence is showing you because you really want it to be right. You really, really want this to be right and you want this idea to work. So you say, well, that test isn't, and you're never going to prove or disprove something on one test, by the way. I think that's really important to state as well. It can start to give you evidence and feedback, but you need to build up that body of evidence over time. But if you start to just ignore what everything is telling you and not editing what you do and kind of changing what you do to meet the needs that you're hearing, then that's where you're going to struggle as well.
And get happy ears. Yeah. Oh God, yeah. And I don't blame him. I really don't. I know that's not what I should say, but I really don't blame him. Especially if you've had this idea for ages and you finally took the leap, and you're like, oh God, it doesn't work. But as you said rightly, that it's better to know now until you've built something that you're paying for consistently. And shout out to Rob Bowley who had on the podcast. Do you really need to build this?
Yeah.
So you touched on it there. What is the most common mistake you find founders make that you're coming in to solve?
Yeah, I think that is often the problem, is where people have got very stuck on this solution idea, and often they've not necessarily thought about it in terms of, is this a really important need or problem to solve for the user? Sometimes they've not even thought about, they've had a solution idea and they've not thought about whether or not that's something that people actually need or want. And usually the problem that manifests as is that they're not getting traction, they're not getting customers. So, and it becomes in many, many forms. It might be that I've seen a company who were desperately trying lots and lots of different markets because they couldn't get any traction in any of the markets. And actually the solution to that is you need to pick, when you're at a startup, you're not big enough to service 5-6 very, very different markets. So you kind of need to start somewhere and pick something and then really deeply understand the needs of that market. Perhaps pivot and change your product, your solution, to better service the needs in that area. And then if you get traction and as you grow, then you can start to think about, maybe we're ready to move into another market now. Another problem that it kind of manifests as is when, I spoke to a company who were trying to use product-led growth. So they were trying to help the product grow through word of mouth rather than through necessarily a sales process. So they'd built in a share functionality. So they wanted users to share some of their use of the products with other potential users, which in itself is, that's a very valid solution. But the challenge was there was no benefit to the user to share the product. So they weren't doing it. So it's thinking about what benefit is your solution going to have to the user, because if you just provide them with something that doesn't give them a benefit, then they're not going to use that solution, they don't need that solution. So whatever you're building needs to be something that users, it makes their lives better, it makes their lives easier, it's compelling enough that if I share, I'm going to get a benefit. And sometimes you might need to incentivize that maybe. I think GiftGaff, for example, they grew that way because it was kind of £5 off your bill, £5 goes to the next person. So that's enough of a motivation to share. But there has to be a reason and a need. I think this happens with large businesses as well, where they'll often think about, well, we need our users to do this because this will help us grow. So we're going to build this thing for our users to use, but that's just not how it works. There has to be a reason why your potential customer is going to use your product, otherwise they're just not going to use it.
So I'm hearing like a lot of what founders should do is really be just completely unemotional to their idea and product, and it is just a product. It's just an idea I've had. It may work, it may not, but I just need to be a blank canvas ready for any feedback that people can throw at me and really take it for what it is.
Yeah, I think it's about falling in love with the need and not falling in love with the solution.
Oh, love that.
Yeah.
That's a really good way to put it. Okay, because then you can pivot and it's...
Yeah.
Right. Do you... Another thing that I definitely know that happens, because I've done it myself, where you have an idea, you think, oh my God, this would be fantastic. you search it, someone else has already had that idea, right? I mean, I've done it numerous times. I've been drunk maybe, and I thought of an idea, and me and my mates have talked about, oh my God, it's going to be amazing. We talked about it for an hour. Then we look at it and someone's already done it. Is that a bad thing if someone's already doing it?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think it's quite difficult now to come up with an idea that somebody isn't already doing. It's, there's so many companies out there. It's easier than ever to build products. So it's difficult to find a solution that hasn't already been built. I think the key is thinking about, is this a saturated market already? So if there's lots of really established companies doing it, then then that means you're going to need to really disrupt that market. So you're going to have to do it in a much better, different way. Like we saw with the challenger banks, I think that's a really good example where you've had a very established, quite a traditional industry with banking that hasn't changed over multiple years. And then challenger banks like Monzo and Starling came onto the scene and they completely disrupted how banking was done. So they made it all app first, customer wasn't a branch that you went in anymore. It was all done on an app. The actual sign-up process and ID verification was really, really easy, very quick, and that very much, and obviously the user interface was much better quality. You had the concept of pots, for example, in Monzo, which had lots of benefits for users. So that really changed the way of banking. So either if you're breaking into an established market, then you're going to need to bring something very new that people are going to want. And that's definitely an opportunity if you've got an established market like that, or if you've got a market where maybe there's not a really obvious key player, then that might be another opportunity, that there might be users out there that are dissatisfied with all the solutions that are available, and if you can bring something and do something better than those established players, then that's a really good opportunity as well in order to be able to establish yourself or be one of the earlier people to the market. You don't necessarily have to be the first I mean, it depends what you're doing. You don't necessarily have to be the first, but you definitely want to be one of the earlier players so you can establish yourself before everybody else does, and that's another way as well.
Because an interesting thought, because if you're first, it might sound great, but then there's a massive education piece, right, that you need to be going out to market with. So then that's going to be rather than building the business, you're then spending all your time just educating people on this new way of doing something.
Yeah, that can be very difficult. Yeah, and I think I find that myself actually with fractional work, it's still very new to the market. So, and a lot of the fractionals I speak to, a lot of the time we're actually thinking about, well, how can we just generally educate everybody around fractional work, and that's what's available, but that's then meaning that you've got a whole set of barriers to overcome before you can even have a conversation around how that might work. So that's definitely a consideration, is this something that people are aware of and that are going to know and are going to be in a place where they're ready to accept that type of products yet.
And there's a thing of being too early then, right? It's really, it must be case by case, but it all ties into user research and validating your idea, right? And that it all comes back to that. So if you do have an idea and you're drunk in the pub and you talk about it with your mates, as long as there's not a clear key player, it's not too oversaturated, and you're offering something different, then buy the URL.
Yeah, go for it. Start. I think the best thing to do is to start, because you will learn along the way. So even if it's unlikely that your very first idea in the form that you think of it in the pub is going to be the thing that's going to take you to, millions of pounds exit. So the key thing is to start, and to actually start speaking to potential customers, potential market, listen to what they're saying, and start to edit and iterate on your idea based on that. And over time you'll find the thing that's gonna potentially work. So yeah, I think you don't get too stuck in thinking, oh, somebody's already doing that, because you'll never start if you worry about that. I think it's a case of starting.
Yes, and if you don't, then in a year's time, when someone else comes up with an idea, you can't then go, he nicked my idea, what's that all about? Oh damn, we knew we should have done that. Brilliant. Okay, well, that's great advice, thank you. When you're going in to work with a new client, what's the first thing that you do? What's the first step you take?
Yeah, so like many fractionals, I'll usually do an assessment with them to start to understand where the opportunities are for where I can help, really. So often I'll be looking at things like, do you have usually at startup stage, business and product strategy are very closely aligned. So do you have a strategy articulated? Are you really clear on what your market sizing is? What is that actually based on? Have you had conversations with customers? What are those customers or potential customers? What are those customers telling you? How is your marketing going? What have you done so far to get traction? How much traction have you got? How long have you been trying? So it's just understanding all of those different elements in terms of how the business is actually going. What are the pain points in terms of how I can help? Usually from a product perspective, I'll be looking at what are the really big assumptions that are being made at the moment that are going to pose risks to the success of the company. So it's really thinking about when we've built this product or when the company's built this product, have they made some very big assumptions about how users will behave and how customers will behave and what they'll actually want? And so that's where I'll be looking at, well, how can we start to remove some of those risks? How can we start to understand? Obviously, it depends at what stage the company is at as to whether they've got their MVP out or not. But it's actually how can we start to identify areas where we maybe need to do a bit more validation, where we actually need to get a bit more input and feedback to help shape the vision for the product and help shape what that roadmap is going to look like for future development.
What's the difference between validation and traction?
So validation, I would say that's actually understanding. So that's actually testing the idea with users with the objective to gain evidence as to whether or not this is something that users need, whether or not your solution is quite fitting the need and it's delivering what users actually want. So there's different, you can do that at different stages in the product. You can do it at the very early idea stage before you've even built anything. You can do it as you're building. You can do it when you've built a product and actually starting to get some user feedback on what you've built so far. So you can do it throughout the cycle. So validation is around gathering evidence and testing your assumptions, whereas I'd say traction is how many customers are actually paying customers of your product. So how many customers have actually proven that what you're building is actually something that they're willing to pay for, and hopefully over time will stay and you'll retain those users as well. It obviously depends on your products and your business model. If it's just a one-off transaction, that might be a bit different, but usually, especially if you're building a B2B SaaS company, then pretty soon you're going to want to worry about retention as well, so that you're thinking about, because if people buy your product but then you lose all of those users quite quickly, then that's telling you something that they're interested in the need, but they're not necessarily, you're maybe not solving it as well as it needs to be for them to actually want to stay with that product.
Right, so traction is a little bit further down the line.
Yeah.
Right, got you. Okay, that's really helpful. If you were going in with a business, well, actually, you worked for big businesses and small businesses, right? So it's.
I generally I've worked with big businesses in the past. Yes. I generally work with small businesses now.
You've worked for companies like Co-op, Purple Wi-Fi, and now you're helping other smaller businesses at the beginning of their journey. From what you've seen, what can businesses do with their product to scale effectively?
I think one of the biggest things actually comes to how you set up your organisation and teams, because you get to a size where, as a CEO, or as a founder, you're no longer going to be able to be close to all of the detail. When you start to scale up very quickly, you're not going to be able to be in every conversation about what to build in the product, be in every customer meeting. You're going to have meetings with investors, you're going to have meetings with, some big key customers and potential customers, but you're not going to be in that everyday detail quite quickly. So what you need to be able to do is make sure that you're giving a clear enough vision of the direction and what's important, but then empowering your teams to deliver on that vision so that they're able, when they're making all those micro decisions that they're going to make on a daily basis, probably without you even realising, and without them even realising sometimes, those decisions that they're making are moving you in the right direction. And the most powerful thing is, especially as you get bigger and bigger, is when the people who are closest to the detail and the ones who are close to the customer research, the ones who actually understand the code base, understand the decisions that have been made in the past, they're the ones who are going to be the best people who are the best placed to make those decisions. Because if you are making decisions without all of that context, then you're potentially there's going to be things that you're just not aware of. So the more that you can build that empowered culture, the better. But I can totally empathise that that's really difficult, because that means you've got to let go a little bit. And that's very difficult when you've been a founder and you've poured your life into this company and into the products potentially. It's very, very difficult to take that step back and start to let other people make those decisions.
In a bigger business, how can bigger businesses make sure that everyone's communicating effectively? Because that must be a massive issue in a bigger business, right?
Yeah, I think communication, obviously the more people you get, the more communication lines you get, and that slows everything down potentially. So making sure, again, you've got really clear, documented, this is what our vision and strategy is. Things like OKR frameworks can be really good, or just some way of setting, these are what the key priorities are right now and why, and making sure that that's communicated in a way that the whole organisation has visibility of that. And I think all hands meetings where you get everybody in the room together in a virtual room often are really a great thing to do. I've seen businesses that do this really effectively, where they have a monthly cadence of all hands meetings where and actually being really transparent. Don't be afraid to be transparent about information about how the company's performing, what's important, because it gives people that context. If the more you treat people like adults and give them the context of how this impacts our financial performance, how this impacts any risks that we might have, the more people can understand what's actually happening and make better decisions on the ground. So I think that level of transparency can be really powerful. And I think that making sure that you've got a regular cadence of communication, because often communication is the first thing that goes. If you're really busy, it's very easy for that communication to think products. When I say product teams, I include product engineering, UX, design, so the multidisciplinary team. I think it's very easy for those teams to almost become a black hole, because they're not necessarily communicating or showing what they're doing anymore. People don't understand why decisions are being made in terms of what's being built in the product or what isn't. So communication, I think, is one of the things that you always have to be working on and always very conscious of, thinking about over communicating. It's that whole thing of, if you've said it 7 times, then that's the first time somebody's heard of it. So by the time that you're really, really bored of saying the same thing over and over again, that's probably about the time that it's sunk in. So I think making sure that you've got those structures in place is really important.
That's a good rule of thumb. I like it. Final question, because I'm conscious of time. For anyone out there who has an idea and they want to build it, what would be your one piece of advice?
I think speak to your potential customers as much and as early as possible, and don't speak to them with the intention of selling, because as soon as you go into that conversation in terms of, I want to sell you my idea, you stop listening. You're going to be telling that person why your idea is good, even if that's not what you set out or intend to do. Think about, you want to be asking questions and talking for about 10% of the time, that you want that person to be talking for 90% of the time, and ask them about what are their goals, what are their pain points and challenges, obviously within the area that you're working in. What have they used before that's similar? Do they use anything before to solve that problem? So listen more than you talk. And I think the more that you can talk to your target customer, the more you're going to learn, but preferably not always in that kind of sales conversation setting.
Love it. Be unemotional about your idea, validate it. Okay, I like it. Well, look, thank you so much for coming in.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It's been fun. I've learned so much. I really have. And I love these conversations where time just goes. I'm conscious you need to leave soon. But it's been amazing speaking to you. I'm sure you're going to be having tons and tons of new clients coming through. I'm going to be following you more on LinkedIn as well, because I know that you've been posting frequently. Great stuff. And I hope to come to one of the Product Tank events soon.
Oh, please do. Thanks for having me.
And that's it for this week's episode. Thanks so much for listening, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Anything we talked about will be linked in the show notes, and if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we'll catch you on the next one.